Is it all ready?
Yeah, it's going.
Okay. Well, first thing is that my family all came from Altoona, Pennsylvania. My father and my mother and my brothers and my sister were all born in Altoona, Pennsylvania. And my dad was a ruffian. He did some prize fights under the name of Dutch Kirk. And he dropped out of school after his father died. His father had a big job with the Pennsylvania Railroad, and my mother's father also worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. That was what you did in Altoona. But anyway, when my grandfather Kirk died, my father hung around the pool halls, and his sister would fake his school report cards and everything. And so he was not very well educated past the 7th grade or 6th or 7th. And but anyway, he thought he had an incurable disease, and he met my mother, who was worked in a department store, and he was very much attracted to her. And so he was desperate. He went off to a little town called Allegheny with a friend of his who was a born-again Christian. And he got born again, and his problem was, it healed up, and then he could marry my mother.
Oh.
And so they had kids, and with the 4 kids, and my mother and father worked their way across the country, and my dad was so impressed with being born again that he became a preacher. And so they came out to Snoqualmie and Chehalis or Washington, and they would have street meetings like the Salvation Army, and they would they would all talk to people about being born again, and then they'd pass the hat, and then they'd travel on to another town. And finally, they were in Portland, Oregon. My dad met a man, Chrisman. His name was Chrisman, who was one of the regional heads of the Christian and Missionary Alliance Church, which was like an old-fashioned Methodist church, born-again people, but they supported missionaries and so forth. And so anyway, he got him a pastorate in Hood River, Oregon, and then that's where I was born, at 722 May Avenue, and the church the parsonage was next to the church, common wall, and so 9 o'clock one morning, Sunday morning, they announced to the church that Donald Kirk had been born next door, in the church. So that was where I started. And then after a few years there, my father got a different church in Everett, Washington. It was a little bigger church, but it didn't pay very well. He worked in a sawmill and during the week, and was a preacher during Saturday and Sunday and Wednesday night prayer meeting and all that. And so anyway, then later he went back to Hood River for a while, the same church, and then he went, when I was 10, he moved to Santa Rosa, and I'd lived 5 years in Washington, 5 years in Oregon, and moved to California when I was 10 and been here ever since. So he had this church on Humboldt Street, a Christian Missionary Alliance, and so our family, we were there a couple of years. And my brother Bob went off and stayed there when my dad got a calling to Santa Barbara, and so we left Santa Rosa, and my brother Bob stayed behind, and my brother Joe had stayed behind when we moved to California.
Oh.
And with our family, except for Bob, we didn't. We were not college oriented. It was just expected when you get finished, you go to Bible school.
Mm-hmm.
So my brother Joe went to 2 or 3 Bible schools, Chicago and Nyack, New York, where the Christian Missionary Alliance Bible School was. And so anyway, it was just expected. So when I was in high school, I didn't take any college courses. I had a great time. I took drama, and I took typing, and I took journalism, but I didn't. I graduated when I was 15, and I didn't have college courses, so I had to go back to high school a year, take physics and chemistry and extra math. I'd studied in high school. I'd had German, French, and Spanish, and I didn't take any college requirements. So anyway, just before I was 16, I got my college requirements and went to Berkeley, and so I entered Berkeley a month before I was 16 years old. So naturally, I was way behind socially. You know, all the people in were 18 or more. Sure, you know, and so I was had problems that way, but anyway, I had to in Berkeley. I started out as a chemistry major, college of chemistry. In high school, we had a beautiful young woman named Miss Jewell who had gone to Berkeley and was majored in chemistry. I thought they were all like that. So I entered college of chemistry in Berkeley, and then I didn't like to spend all the time in the laboratory and stuff. So I changed to L&S chemistry, and then I eventually changed to English major, and then I graduated as a philosophy major. And but the most interesting thing to me was to shake my born again Christian upbringing. I learned more in psychology from Freud. That opened up a whole new field to me and helped me shake all that stuff, you know.
Sure.
And
because it was fundamentalist.
The fundamental religionists, And so anyway, I worked on the newspaper for a couple of years, and then I worked on the humor magazine, The Pelican. And I also worked on the literary magazine, The Occident. And in fact, when I left college, I was supposed to come back and be editor of The Occident, which I never was. I was editor of the Frosh Bible, I called it. As I associated with the YMCA on the Berkeley campus was called Stiles Hall. And I went there to do a story on something for the Daily Cal, and they said, well, we need somebody to edit the Frosh Bible for us, which was a little publication they gave to all the freshmen. It had the school yells and traditions and all of the stuff that you needed to know about University of California. And so anyway, when I left well, in Berkeley also, I had a good friend, and we used to put on musicals. We'd put on every week. We'd put on a classical music, play symphonies and all that. I love symphony music and all that. And so this was a fellow named Bruce Weber. He and I put on this music stuff and everything. And he was from Heidi's area. What's
Woodland?
Woodland.
Oh.
And he was a Rhodes Scholar eventually.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he was a good friend. We did all this stuff. So anyway, after that, I went to, after Berkeley, I went back to Santa Barbara, and I had worked my way through school. I called it a Newberry Scholarship every time, a dime store there. Every time I went there, I had worked there in high school, and I was a soda fountain jerk, and so I could go back and college vacations and work a week or two, and
Sure.
and Berkeley was pretty cheap, $25 for a quarter and $1 extra for hospitalization. That was the what it cost. But even at that, I had a job with a student, like a WPA thing, where I did research in Bancroft Library in college, and for $12, $15 a month, and that paid for cigarettes and women and all.
Huh?
I had a job for my room and a job for my board. And
All right.
I worked at Bowles Hall, which was the first at that time the only dormitory right by the Greek Theater and so forth. So anyhow, after college, went back to Santa Barbara, and I wanted to work on a newspaper, but the Santa Barbara paper had a vacancy every 2 or 3 years. There was no turnover. So on about August 23rd, 1936, I left and went to San Francisco and went on to Albion Street, where I sat on the porch where my future wife lived.
Oh, right.
And so that was, so then it was very tough. It was Depression days, and I wanted to work on a newspaper. It was very tough to get in, and but I hung around the Chronicle office. I didn't want to work for Hearst. I hated Hearst.
Oh.
Before I found out that the Chronicle guys were scoundrels too, and everything. But I thought they were like or Scripps Howard. I would have worked at the News. They had 2 Hearst papers, the Call Bulletin and the Examiner, and I didn't even apply to those places. But I sat in the office at the Chronicle, and every once in a while, one of the copy boys would call in sick, and I'd work a day. And so I got on the payroll, but just by temporary thing. And but it took me it was January 1st, 1937, when I got a job as a full-time copy boy on the Chronicle. And meanwhile, I was eating out of garbage cans. I lost 40 pounds looking for work. I weighed 205, and I went to 165, so hard times. Yeah. Because I'd get a job. I got a job at a Newberry's fountain, but I ate too much. They fired me. And then I got a job in the city of Paris, being a bartender and soda jerk and all that. And 2 hours later, I got a call from the Chronicle that they needed a copy boy. I had to walk off of that job because I really wanted to work for the Chronicle. So they had to pay me for 2 hours work or something. They were real pissed off at me. But anyway, I finally got this job. And the way I got the job was Herb Kane was a copy boy, and he got promoted on January 1st, 1937, to become a reporter.